Hi Glitter Zoo fam, Tony here. We're going to be working on part 2 of our fabric tumbler. In this video we're going to be trimming the seam here and on top and on the bottom. So we have our fabric super stiff from the Mod Podge we coated it with. I like to trim some of this fabric off, so I'm going to take my scissor and just cut some of this fabric off. Just keep cutting all the way to take just some of the excess fabric off so you can actually see what you're doing. And you can save the extra pieces of fabric, make a keychain, magnet, whatever you like. I like to save the scraps. All right, let me trim the top too. So basically, I put this here and it will direct you to have a straight line. I use painter's tape to help me see where I want to cut my seam, and it's always best to use a brand new blade. So I use single edge blades. You can get them Harbor Freight, Home Depot, Lowe's, any hardware store. But using a new blade each time when you're cutting the fabric really helps to get a nice clean cut. Okay, so I'm going to take piece of painter's tape and I'm just gonna make, or I think a straight line is. You can always use a laser. There's a few different tools to make sure you get a straight cut. Yep, that's pretty straight. So now that you have your painter's tape down, you want to take a brand new blade and now just run it across your painter's tape, the seam. I like to pull it away as I go, so I know it's pretty straight, but just follow the line of your painter's tape. And since we used a lot of Mod Podge, well, as I'm cutting, the fabric is not fraying. And you see how I'm getting this nice, clean cut? That's why it's so important to use a brand new blade. And you can use the same blade for one tumbler. You could just flip it over and use the other side. And just keep following the path of your painter's tape until you get down to the bottom of your tumbler. Make sure you're applying pressure too, so you're getting through the entire thickness, because remember there's Mod Podge on top of this fabric too. You could just totally pull back, cut this little piece off here. And now you can take this painter's tape off. And look at that nice clean cut we got. Now we'll work on this side. Just want to pull up the edges a little here on this side. And once we cut this, we'll glue it back down. Now you can cut another piece of painter's tape or use the same one. I'm probably just going to use the same one. And I just basically feel for my seam. I feel it through here, all right. Now just feel to make sure your fabric matches up. Unfortunately, getting the seams to match up isn't a 1, 2, 3 thing. Now at this time, I usually don't use the razor for this second seam. I'll take my fabric scissor and I'll cut along this edge. You can use a razor, but I like to use my fabric scissor. That also gives a nice clean cut because I only use it for fabric. Now once again, just follow the line or the path of your painter's tape. Peel this up a little bit. Since I didn't get too close over here, as you can tell. So now I'll just go back in. Now we'll take this off. We're going to use the first seam that I did. Now we're going to go put Mod Podge in here to get this down. You really want a lot of Mod Podge in that seam to hold it down so epoxy does not seep through. Now just go and press and work your fabric into the Mod Podge you just put at the seam. Then press down your other seam. Look how nice that seam is. It's nice and straight. And now we're gonna work on the top of the trimming, the top of the tumbler, and the bottom of the tumbler. Just make sure this is all pressed down so it doesn't move. Now I'm gonna take my fabric trimmer. And this, you can adjust the height by just moving it up and down the blade, okay? Or flipping it over if you want a larger cut. Let's see. I'm gonna trim some of this bottom fabric off. So when I put it down on the trimmer, it sits nice and even. And no fabric is in the way. So we get an even cut all around the tumbler. Okay, I feel like this is a perfect height. So now you take your cup, apply pressure, and just spin it along the blade. Make sure you apply pressure so it cuts through and you get a nice clean cut. Okay. Cut this area right here. And you get a nice clean cut all around the bottom of your tumbler. Now we're gonna do the top. Same thing you did with the bottom. Press it against the blade and just go around your entire tumbler. I like to swing it back and forth to make sure I actually get down to the tumbler and cut the fabric. So now we did the seam, we trimmed the bottom, we trimmed the top, and this is what your tumbler will look like. So now, since we trimmed, we have to do Mod Podge again, because you want to have Mod Podge coated on the fabric you just did. So you definitely want to do another 3 to 4 coats. And remember, be generous with the Mod Podge, like we were in part 1. And really pay attention to those edges. And keep putting more Mod Podge on it until you coat the whole tumbler. Then you let this coat dry and go in, do another coat, let that dry, and repeat. I would do about 3 to 5 more coats of Mod Podge on this. You really want a good seal on your fabric tumblers, because if epoxy seeps through and you get wet spots on your fabric, there is no way to fix that. So this is what the tumbler looks like, trimmed. And then in part 3 of this video, we'll be adding glitter to the top and bottom. So stay tuned.